Appalachian Mountains are older than memory itself. Older than maps, older than names. People don't just get lost here. They disappear. What you're about to hear aren't campfire legends or internet myths. These are 3 Appalachian horror stories. Stories locals don't like to talk about, and outsiders are warned never to dig into. Some trails should never be walked. Some voices should never be answered. And once you hear these stories, you'll understand why the mountains are never truly silent. Personally, the 3rd story disturbed me the most. There's something about it that still doesn't sit right with me. But now I want to know, which story affected you the most? Let me know in the comments. The breakup happened in April, and by June I still felt like I was walking around with a hole in my chest. Friends told me to stay busy, to go out, to meet new people. But I did not want noise and distraction. I wanted the opposite. I wanted stillness. That is how I ended up planning a solo camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. I had done plenty of hiking with groups before, but never alone, never overnight. The idea appealed to me. Just me and the woods and nothing else. No phones, no people. No reminders of everything I had lost. I spent hours studying maps and trail reports. I did not want a popular campsite full of families and their screaming kids. I wanted isolation. I found a spot near Forney Ridge, far enough off the main trails that most people would not bother. The reports said there was a creek nearby and a small clearing that made for good camping. I started the hike early on a Thursday morning. The trailhead was empty except for one other car, probably someone doing a day hike. The path was well maintained for the first few miles, then it split off onto a less traveled route. After that, it was just me in the forest. The hike took most of the day. By the time I found the clearing, the sun was already sinking behind the ridgeline. The spot was perfect. A small open area surrounded by tall pines, with the creek running about 50 feet away. The sound of moving water was constant and soothing. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and cooked a simple dinner of ramen and trail mix. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with sound. Crickets and frogs sang from the creek. Something rustled in the underbrush, probably a raccoon or a possum. An owl called from somewhere up the ridge. I sat by the fire and felt, for the first time in months, like I could breathe. I stayed up later than I should have, feeding the fire and staring at the stars through the breaks in the canopy. When I finally crawled into my tent, I fell asleep almost immediately. I do not know what time it was when I woke up. Late. The kind of deep night where the darkness feels solid. I lay there in my sleeping bag, groggy and confused about what had pulled me from sleep. Then I realized the sounds were gone. The creek was still running. I could hear that. But everything else had stopped. No crickets, no frogs, no rustling in the leaves. The forest had gone completely silent except for the water. I unzipped my tent and looked out. The fire had died down to embers, giving off just enough light to see the immediate area around my campsite. Everything looked normal. Trees, rocks, my backpack hanging from a branch where I had left it. Then I heard it, a cough. Not an animal sound. Not a grunt or a bark or anything you would expect from wildlife. It was a human cough. The kind someone makes when they are trying to clear their throat. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the tent. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trees and shadows, but nothing else. I called out, "Is someone there?" No answer. Just the sound of the creek and my own breathing. I should have stayed in the tent. I should have zipped it up and waited for morning. But fear does strange things to your judgment. I needed to know what was out there. I needed to see it. I walked toward the creek, sweeping the flashlight back and forth. The beam caught on rocks, on tree trunks, on the glint of water moving over stones. Then it found her. She was sitting on a large flat rock at the edge of the creek, facing away from me. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down her back in tangled masses. She wore what looked like a dress, pale and torn, the fabric hanging off her shoulders in strips. Her feet were bare. I froze. The flashlight stayed locked on her, and she did not move, did not turn around, just sat there with her back to me, perfectly still. "Hello," I said. My voice came out weak and shaky. "Are you okay?" She did not respond, did not even shift. I took a step closer, my legs trembling. The beam of my flashlight showed more details now. Her skin was pale, almost gray in the artificial light. Her dress was not just torn but filthy, stained with mud and something darker. I swept the flashlight away from her for just a second, checking the woods around us. No one else. No tent, no backpack, no sign of where she had come from. When I brought the light back to the rock, she was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone, like she had never been there at all. I stood there, the flashlight shaking in my hand, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Then I forced myself to walk to the rock. My legs felt like they were made of water, but I needed to see. I needed proof. There were footprints in the mud, bare feet, small, pressed into the soft earth at the edge of the creek. They led from the water up to the rock where she had been sitting. But there were no prints leading away. Nothing to show where she had gone. I ran. I left the flashlight on that rock and I ran back to my campsite. I tore down my tent, stuffed everything into my pack without bothering to organize it, and started hiking in the dark. I did not care that I could barely see the trail. I did not care that I was probably going to trip and break an ankle. I just needed to get out of those woods. I hiked through the night, using my phone as a flashlight even though I had no signal. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like her, sitting there with her back to me, waiting. I reached my car just as the sun was coming up. I threw my gear in the trunk and drove straight home, stopping only once for gas. I did not look back at the mountains. I did not want to see them. It has been 3 years since that night. I have not been camping since. I have tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and darkness and grief. But I remember those footprints in the mud. I remember how she vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Sometimes I research the area online, looking for stories of missing hikers or unexplained deaths. I have found a few. Women who disappeared on the trails and were never found. Cold cases from decades ago. But nothing that explains what I saw. I think about her sometimes, that woman by the creek. I wonder if she's still there sitting on that rock waiting for someone to find her. I wonder what she wanted. If she wanted anything at all. Mostly, I wonder what would have happened if I had not looked away. If I had kept the light on her and waited to see what she would do. Would she have turned around? Would I have seen her face? I am glad I will never know the answer. I never wanted to go back to that house. My uncle's place sat deep in the hills between Creta and War, 2 towns in West Virginia that barely count as dots on a map. When he died, someone had to deal with his things, and since I was the only nephew who still lived within driving distance, that someone became me. The house was worse than I remembered. Uncle Ray had been a collector, which is a polite way of saying he never threw anything away. Rusted car parts littered the yard. Stacks of newspapers from the 1990s filled the porch. Inside, every surface was covered with things he thought he might need someday. Coffee cans full of screws, broken radios, boxes of magazines about guns and survivalism. The smell of mildew and old tobacco hung in every room. I had been sorting through this mess for 3 days when I realized my phone had no signal. Not unusual out here, but I needed to call the estate lawyer about some paperwork. I remembered my uncle once mentioning that if you hiked up the old logging road behind the property, you could sometimes catch a signal from the tower over in Iagar. It was late afternoon when I set out. The logging road was overgrown but still visible, a scar of exposed dirt cutting through the dense forest. The trees were thick here, mostly oak and pine, and they blocked out enough sunlight that the temperature dropped as soon as I entered the woods. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching for roots and rocks that might trip me up. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something odd. There were footprints in the soft mud where a small creek crossed the road. Fresh ones. Boot prints, maybe a size 10 or 11, pressed deep into the earth. They came from the direction I was heading and veered off the road into the brush. I stopped and looked at those prints for a long time. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. This was private land, posted with no trespassing signs that my uncle had nailed to trees decades ago. The prints led into terrain that looked almost impassable, a tangle of mountain laurel and deadfall so thick you would need a machete to get through. I should have turned back then. But curiosity is a strange thing. It pulls at you even when every instinct says to leave it alone. I left the road and pushed into the brush, following the direction of those boot prints. The going was brutal. Branches scraped my face. Thorns caught on my jacket. I could only manage a few yards at a time before I had to stop and pull myself free from the undergrowth. After about 10 minutes of this, I came to a small clearing where an old tree had fallen and created a gap in the canopy. That is when I saw it. Between two trees, maybe 40 feet away, stood a figure. At first I thought it was a person, just someone standing there. But something was wrong. It was too still. Not the stillness of someone who has paused to listen or look at something. This was the stillness of an object, of something that had never moved and never would. The figure was tall and dark. I could not make out details because the shadows were so deep in that part of the forest, but I could see the basic shape. 2 legs, a torso, something that might have been a head. It stood with a slight forward lean, as if it had been frozen mid-step. My heart started hammering. I do not scare easily, but this was different. This was not the fear you feel when you are startled or when you watch a horror movie. This was something older, something that lives in the part of your brain that remembers when humans were prey. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, but I did not run. I stood there staring at this thing, and the strangest thought came to me. I recognized it. Not in the way you recognize a person or a place. It was more like recognizing a word in a language you did not know you spoke. Like some part of me, some ancient part that existed long before I was born, knew exactly what I was looking at. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. The figure did not move. It did not make a sound. It just stood there. And I stood here. And the forest around us was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I backed away. Slowly at first, one step at a time, keeping my eyes on the shape between the trees. When I had put some distance between us, I turned and pushed through the brush as fast as I could. I did not care about the thorns anymore. I did not care about the branches whipping my face. I just needed to get back to the road. When I finally burst out onto the logging trail, I ran. I ran all the way back to my uncle's house, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. I locked the doors even though I knew locks would not matter if that thing decided to follow me. I sat in the living room with all the lights on until the sun came up. The next morning, I called my brother. I told him what I had seen, expecting him to laugh or tell me I was being paranoid. But he did not laugh. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Do you remember Grandma Betty? Our grandmother had lived in these mountains her whole life. She died when I was 12, but I remembered her stories. She used to tell us things about the woods, warnings disguised as folk tales. Do not whistle at night. Do not follow voices that call your name. Stay on the trail." My brother said she had a name for what lived in certain parts of the forest. He could not remember the exact word. It was something in the old dialect, a mix of Scots-Irish and whatever the original settlers had picked up from the indigenous people who lived here first. But he remembered what she said it meant, the things that watch. She told him once, when he was hunting near the property line, that there were parts of the woods where the old things still lived, places where the boundary between the world we know and the world we do not was thinner. She said you could feel it when you crossed into those places. The air would change, the sounds would stop, and if you were unlucky, you might see one of them standing there, watching, waiting for something we could not understand. "Do not go back there," my brother said. "Just finish up with the house and leave." I took his advice. I spent one more day sorting through my uncle's things, hired a company to haul away the junk, and listed the property with a realtor. I have not been back since, but sometimes, late at night, I think about that figure in the woods. I think about how still it was, how it seemed to be part of the forest itself. And I think about that feeling of recognition, that ancient knowing that whispered in the back of my mind. I wonder if my uncle saw it too. I wonder if that is why he lived the way he did, surrounded by walls of junk, as if he was building a fortress against something that could not be locked out. I wonder if that is why he never left, even when the isolation started to break him down. Mostly, I wonder if it is still there, standing between those two trees, perfectly still, watching the empty trail, waiting for the next person who wanders off the path and into the places where the old things still live. I will never know, and I am fine with that. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some paths are better left untraveled. And some things, the things that watch from the deep woods, are better left alone in the shadows where they belong. I have been hiking for 15 years. I know how to read a map, how to filter water, how to hang a bear bag. I am not the kind of person who panics in the woods. At least I was not until last summer. I was doing a solo trip near Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. The plan was simple. 3 days, 2 nights, following a loop trail that would bring me back to my car. The weather was perfect. My gear was solid. I felt good. On the second day, I went off trail. I know. That is rule number 1. Stay on the trail. But I had spotted what looked like a game path leading through a gap in the trees, and I was curious. I followed it for maybe 20 minutes until I came to a pond. It was beautiful. Maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by thick forest. The water so clear, I could see the bottom. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. A turtle sunned itself on a log. It felt like I had stumbled into a secret place, somewhere humans were not supposed to find. I decided to camp there for the night. I set up my tent in a small clearing near the water, hung my food bag from a tree branch, and spent the afternoon swimming and reading. As the sun went down, I cooked dinner and felt pretty good about my decision to leave the trail. That feeling lasted until about midnight. I was in my tent, half asleep, when I heard something moving in the woods. Not a deer or a raccoon, something big, branches breaking, leaves crunching, heavy footsteps. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight. My mind went immediately to the worst places. I had been watching true crime videos before the trip, documentaries about serial killers who hunted in national parks. I thought about all the stories of hikers who disappeared and were never found. Then I remembered the bones I had seen that afternoon. I had not thought much of them at the time. A deer ribcage maybe, half buried in leaves near the edge of the pond. But now, in the dark, I started imagining other possibilities. The footsteps got louder, closer. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. A man was running through the trees. He was naked, completely naked. His skin was pale in the moonlight, and he was sprinting like something was chasing him. He crashed through the undergrowth maybe 30 feet from my tent, stumbling over roots and rocks, his arms pumping as he ran. I zipped the tent shut and pressed myself against the far side, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I could hear him crashing through the woods, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then silence. I waited, listening so hard my ears hurt. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and my own pulse pounding in my head. I spent the rest of the night awake, clutching my knife, waiting for him to come back. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to check my food bag. It was shredded. Something had torn it open and scattered my supplies all over the ground. Granola bars, beef jerky, a bag of trail mix. All of it gone. I packed up faster than I have ever packed in my life. I did not bother folding my tent properly. I just stuffed everything into my pack and started hiking back toward the main trail. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see him standing there, watching me. It took me 3 hours to get back to my car. I drove straight home and spent the next week trying to convince myself that I had not actually seen what I thought I saw. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe I had been more tired than I realized. Then, about 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through Reddit and saw a post on a hiking forum. The title was something like, "I almost died skinny dipping in West Virginia." I clicked on it and my stomach dropped. The guy, Derek, described going for a late-night swim at a secluded pond near Harper's Ferry. He left his clothes on the shore and was floating on his back, looking at the stars, when he heard something moving in the trees. He thought it was another person at first. Then he heard sniffing. A bear walked out of the woods and headed straight for his clothes. Derek watched from the water as this bear picked up his pants and started pulling out the protein bars he had stuffed in the pockets. Then the bear found his backpack and tore it open, eating everything inside. Derek knew he could not stay in the water forever. He was already getting cold, so he decided to make a run for it. He climbed out of the pond on the far side and sprinted into the woods, naked and terrified, while the bear was distracted with his food. He spent the next hour stumbling through the forest in the dark, trying to get far enough away that the bear would not follow. He eventually found his way back to the trail and hiked to his car with nothing but scratches and bruises. At the end of the post, he wrote something like, "If anyone saw a naked guy running through the woods near Harper's Ferry last month, that was me. Sorry for the scare." I read that post 3 times. Then I started laughing. I laughed until I cried. All that fear, all that paranoia, and it was just some poor guy running from a bear. I sent him a private message. Told him I was the person camping by the pond. Told him I thought he was a serial killer. We ended up meeting for coffee, and now he is one of my best friends. We still laugh about it. He calls me the guy who thought I was a murderer. I call him the naked bear wrestler. We have been on a dozen hikes together since then, and we always make jokes about checking for serial killers and bears before we set up camp. The whole thing taught me something important. Fear changes how you see the world. It turns a guy fleeing from a bear into a monster. It turns animal bones into evidence of murder. It makes you forget that most scary situations have perfectly normal explanations. So now, when I am out in the woods and something strange happens, I try to remember Derek. I try to think about what the simple explanation might be before I jump to the worst possible conclusion. But I still check my food bag twice before I go to sleep, just in case.